this is one sort of side of the conversation. Just to let everybody know that the meeting is being recorded. It is being recorded so we could post it on the BMCA website. We'll try to figure that one out later. But it is, so if you do not feel comfortable being recorded, you could feel free to turn your camera off. It's fine with us. I could see basically everybody that's on anyways. Also to let you know, this is one sort of side of the issue of the missing middle. We'll be hearing the other side of this October 1st is when I'm tentatively have it set up. So what I want to do is also set some sort of ground rules too. Depending on the amount of people that join, I may limit the questions to only 2 questions per individual, especially if we have a lot of people that want to ask questions. If we do have a smaller audience, I will tend to allow more sort of questions on that. But I do want to very welcome Peter Rousselot. Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay, Rousselot. And also Bill Roos, who helped sort of set this up. Very, very appreciative of them taking their time. I have been asked a number of times to have Peter come and do this presentation to BMCA, and either the times didn't work out or COVID-19 or what have you kind of limited us from being able to do this. So what I'm going to do is also when you comes to questions, if you have questions and you do not feel comfortable voicing them, I can ask them for you. There is a chat feature in Zoom, and I am monitoring that chat box. And I can ask your question for you if you feel a little hesitant or shy to do that. Or there will be a question and answer period. We'll be able to unmute you. Just let us know that you have a question and we'll let it go. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started so we can end on time. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I'm going to ask Bill to put up our first slide, and we'll get started in just a moment. My name's Peter Rousselot, and I wanted to thank very much Chris for the opportunity to speak tonight to members of the Boulevard Manor Civic Association. As Chris said, we've been interested in speaking with you for quite a while. COVID has intervened and schedules have intervened, but we're pleased tonight to have this opportunity. So very much appreciated. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of a group called Arlingtonians for Our Sustainable Future. First, a little bit about my background. For those of you who don't know, I'm a 23-year resident of Arlington. I have been involved in civic life for the last couple of decades here in Arlington and served in various capacities. I've been the chair of the Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission to the Arlington County Board. I've been a co-chair of the Advisory Council on Instruction to the Arlington School Board. I served 2 terms as chair of the Arlington County Democratic Committee. And I've been involved in other civic projects over that 2-decade period. Our group, Arlingtonians for Our Sustainable Future, would like you to be sensitive to and aware that the issue that brings us together tonight, the so-called impending missing middle study by a branch of the Arlington County government, needs to be best understood in the context of a series of accelerated development initiatives that preceded it and are continuing during it. And we believe that those initiatives and the Missing Middle Initiative are driven too much by county staff and large developers and too little by the community. And one of our goals in the presentation tonight is to give you a different perspective on these issues and to hope that you will take away from that some initiatives and some ideas that we believe you should approach the county board to adopt, which will make this a more sensible process as we go forward. So let's move to the next slide. Shortly before, just before the county made the decision along with Amazon to welcome Amazon's new headquarters to Arlington, Arlington put together one of its annual series of population and growth and employment forecasts. This particular one was made just around the time of the Amazon announcement, or it preceded the Amazon announcement by a little bit. And what it showed is an anticipation at that time of very rapid growth in population in Arlington, from a base of around 230,000 this year to a 2040 forecast amount of 287,000, a rapid, significant population increase. And that forecast, made at the time it was made, assumed that the development that would take place would be by right development and the typical expected site plan development that would take place in accordance with sector plans, and did not envision anything at the time like the missing middle housing study or other major new changes in zoning. So without those things, this is what Arlington was expecting. And of course, it was also made at a time way before the current COVID crisis has put a different spin on many of the assumptions that were made before this year. Let's move to the next slide. This is a significant calculation that was made by a very strong independent study from the George Mason University Stephen S. Fuller Institute, directed by Professor Fuller, who was and is one of the premier regional economists in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And he was asked to estimate what the impact of adding each new resident in Arlington is on an average basis. What is the impact of the average arrival of a new resident in Arlington? And he calculated that for every new resident that comes to Arlington, there is a net negative fiscal impact on our budget in excess of $850. That means that as we accelerate development and add population, even in the amounts that we expected before any major changes in zoning, such as might occur from the Missing Middle Initiative, we are impacting our infrastructure and our schools primarily in a net negative way that we have to somehow or other make up. And proving whether or not we have the resources on the revenue side to make it up is a critically important factor in any decisions about upzoning or other major development projects. Let's move to the next slide. This is a slide that was prepared as JBG Smith and Vornado, which were previously two of the largest developers in Arlington for many years, were getting ready to merge. And this was a pitch that Vornado made to its shareholders as to why they ought to vote for the merger with JBG Smith. And the pitch was based on the premise that the combined companies would be entering and would become one of the fastest growing real estate companies in the nation, and would be a major developer of multifamily residential assets over time. And this is certainly proven to be the case. This combined company, JBG Smith, now owns over 50% of the properties in the Crystal City market. In particular, they are by far the largest developer. And when you combine them and the power that comes with that, with the arrival of Amazon, these two entities, this developer, JBG Smith, and Amazon itself, are driving the train in many respects with development in Arlington. And in the opinion of ASF, our county government is not pushing back sufficiently and demanding enough from them. Let's move to the next slide. Let's go back for a sec. Here we go. It's in the foregoing context that we now are dealing with the so-called missing middle housing study, which the county first announced back in January of 2020 and was gearing up to have some significant civic engagement in Arlington in person in the early couple of months of 2020, but which was ground to a halt by COVID. The plan was initially announced in December 2019. The preparations were being made, and then COVID struck, and Housing Arlington didn't do anything for a while, but then later in the spring, they began to proceed forward with their so-called missing middle plans. And over the summer, they've issued a series of bulletins which they believe should be consulted about issues relating to the missing middle. The term missing middle is something of a subjective and deceptive term in that Arlington already has in many neighborhoods the kind of housing, namely duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes, that the term missing middle implies are missing from Arlington. In fact, there is a major substantial inventory of this type of housing, but it doesn't currently exist in other neighborhoods that are zones for strictly single family. The term has also been used from time to time in the past to imply that if only we could enable the sudden introduction of a lot more of these duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes, we would produce a lot of housing that is much more affordable. And the Housing Arlington has bounced back and forth on this, but most lately, they've abandoned to a large degree the claim that we're going to produce housing that is affordable to a family at a median income in Arlington, but are now saying, well, actually what we're going to do is produce we're going to increase the availability of certain kinds of housing types that aren't available in some neighborhoods in Arlington that now don't have them based on current zoning. And that also is it shows a somewhat schizophrenic attitude on their part. As we see on the third bullet on this slide, we've over 50% of the units in many areas of the county in which there are also single family homes already are missing middle housing. So they're not really missing. But the introduction, the significant upzoning that this program might entail will have a very significant cost impact, as I mentioned earlier, on schools, parks, roads, transit, green space, our mature tree canopy services, and our tax base. So let's move to the next slide. One of the real issues and problems under Virginia law regarding this upzoning proposal that the missing middle concept envisions is that upzoning is forever. Under Virginia law, if the Arlington County Board approves upzoning throughout the county or in particular areas, and then decides 2 or 3 years later, oops, this isn't really working well, let's go back to the way it was before. We can't do that in Arlington under the law. And that's what I mean by missing middle is by upzoning is forever. You can't go back. And so that's why it's so important that we all be empowered with the tools that we will need to understand what the negative implications are of upzoning, as well as any positive ones that can be demonstrated. It certainly will add cars, it will impact on-street parking, it will likely lead to increases in impervious surfaces on existing lots, add running and flooding, and kill trees. Let's move to the next slide. As I also hinted earlier, the county and certainly advocacy groups like AHS, whom I think you're going to hear from at your meeting on October 1, have implied in the past that there will be an affordability benefit if only we can enable the creation of these this new kind of duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes on lots that are currently zoned single family or at least occupied by a single family house. We'll get some less expensive housing that will be available to people at a median price. But here, this is an example shown here of a development in which duplexes were constructed on a previously single family lot. And the result was that the two duplexes that were constructed have gone on the market for $1.1 million each. Now, it's true, I suppose, that a $1.1 million townhouse is more affordable than a $1.8 million single family house occupying the same lot. But this isn't the kind of affordability that people in housing, people in Arlington really think of when they talk about affordable housing. Making a lot more housing affordable to people who have to pay $1.1 million is not the kind of public policy goal that most of us jump to mind when we think about affordable housing. We also have to understand, as was indicated by the earlier slide about development over time, that from 2000 to 2019 in Arlington, the time I've been here that entire time, Arlington has added almost 3,000 units per year of new housing. And despite this increase in supply of 3,000 units per year, prices in Arlington have kept rising and rising significantly fast. And the reason is we are a really desirable area because of our location right close to the District of Columbia and the government and the businesses there. And we are a different type of market than some markets in the Middle West, for example. We are a hot market. And academics like Professor Storper, whom we cite on our website, have demonstrated that when you have that kind of market demand, you don't get the kind of impact on price that you would hope for otherwise by increasing the number of units, even at the rate of 3,000 a year. So the bottom line here is basically that this is not going to be the solution to people who want to find and provide lower cost housing to people in an income range that would be typical for someone in a service job, a public service job like a policeman, a firefighter, or a teacher. So let's move to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, one of the major impacts of adding large numbers of new residents per year is the impact on APS. And this slide comes from a proposal that the county manager made toward the end of 2019 and sent to APS, in which the county manager suggested that a number of locations in Arlington noted on this map in which are parkland or zone parkland and are parkland now, might be candidate opportunities for building new APS schools. And that set off an uproar among people in the parks community, because over time, as our population has been drastically increasing, as I previously mentioned, the ratio in Arlington of population to available green space has been getting larger and larger, and the basically the per unit number has been declining. And Arlington has failed after 5 years after the suggestion was made to create a public facilities master plan. Arlington still hasn't done it. In 2015, a group called the Community Facilities Study Group recommended that Arlington needed to have a master public facilities plan, including APS, which would designate over a long-term time horizon, 15, 20, 25 years, 10 years to 20 years out. Where are we going to locate the new facilities, the new fire stations, the new schools, the new community centers, to accommodate the population we were already authorizing and planning for before the missing middle ever came along. And it's really a great shame and a scandal, I think, that after 5 years have elapsed, we don't have that plan, we don't have a deadline for that plan, and yet the county is coming to us with a missing middle proposal to start looking at it without those plans and without making them available to the community. Let's move to the next slide.
I'm muting.
Another significant,
I'm gonna go downstairs in a minute.
Another significant impact on our infrastructure, well before anything like the missing middle and the added population pressures it would create, are infrastructure like our water mains. At the end of 2019, there was a massive water main rupture up near the Chain Bridge in Arlington. It was so significant that there had to be a boil water advisory issued basically for most, if not all, of Arlington. It shut down APS for a day. Every single school, no matter how close or how far away from this water main break. Our water mains are old and ancient, even with respect to the impact of our existing population and our expected future population before the Missing Middle Initiative. We have no long-term plan explaining how we're going to finance these costs for APS or for water mains or for storm sewers. And this is part of what you should be demanding from the county board before you're really asked to seriously consider the missing middle proposal. Let's move to the next slide. There is also, as another example of an impact on our infrastructure, something that happened in the spring, just as COVID was arriving here. Wakefield High School began to experience significant declines in water pressure, or put maybe in a better way, declines in the water pressure at Wakefield, which had been occurring for quite a while, were suddenly an issue that came to the forefront because people, while they were still attending Wakefield, were asked to be washing their hands every day because of COVID before we closed the schools, and they couldn't get enough hot water to do it because of the lack of significant water pressure. So that is another suggestion and another impact that it was occurring as part of the infrastructure at APS without any new hundreds and thousands of units that would be authorized by some kind of significant missing middle proposal. Please, the next slide. So as the county is about to launch this phase of the missing middle study, they're saying we need to act now. They're saying we need to authorize all of this housing because it will diversify housing types in the county. But they haven't provided us with these tools to assess the fiscal and environmental impacts before and during the time we're being asked to consider the missing middle housing. And we think this is inverted reasoning and poor planning on their part. Next slide. Among the serious impacts on our infrastructure are the needs created by climate change that is caused by national and international factors, but which impacts Arlington as it does everybody else, and the incremental impacts in Arlington specifically of flooding that's due to poor development decisions, accelerated development, and lack of sufficient infrastructure to accommodate the flooding that's occurring from both climate change and our Arlington development decisions. This photo taken in July 2019 is an example of what that was like. We had a similar flood only a year prior to that. We had enormous rains today with flooding in parts of Arlington that were serious in certain neighborhoods. The county has recently authorized an infrastructure bond that's going to be on the ballot this fall that's going to begin to start building what that's going to cost, but we don't have a comprehensive assessment of that cost together with all the other infrastructure costs that are being driven by development. Let's move to the next slide. Our ecosystems really are under pressure from both these climate change and other forces. Already now, as of approximately a year or so ago, 45% of the surface in Arlington is impervious, meaning that it does not absorb rainfall and accelerates the flow of rain on impervious surfaces to end up elsewhere downstream. We are losing 9 acres of permeable surface every year. The development that's going on in Arlington now before any missing middle initiative and upzoning attributable to it is equivalent to adding impervious surfaces the size of the footprint of the Pentagon every 3 to 4 years. We are losing vegetation and mature tree canopy, and we are increasingly vulnerable to all these things, not only due to that accelerated development, but to climate change as well. And we need to have a plan from the county to assess how it's going to deal with all of that before it tries to rush through any sort of upzoning or missing middle proposal without that plan. Next slide. Now we come to COVID. Let's go back to that prior slide. Now we come to COVID. And the planning forecasts for population that I mentioned previously, the estimates of costs for new schools and other public infrastructure, all of those things were developed prior to the impact of COVID-19. We know already from having lived through this for 6 or 7 months of various stages of lockdown that this has had a devastating impact on the ability of families to cope with school-age children when they also have full-time jobs. It's had a very bad impact on social safety net costs in Arlington. We've had a drastic decline in our hospitality and other tax income. We have increased expenses that we may have incurred and may continue to incur to forestall evictions when the federal and state money runs out. And our tax revenues from real estate certainly could decline further when, for example, our commercial office revenue could be very adversely impacted if there is a fundamental change in views of major employers to allow their employees to work from home, and therefore a decreased need on their part for in-person office space in Arlington, particularly after COVID is over or whether after a vaccine is introduced. People may decide they're going to save money, and this is not the moment during COVID to be calling on the community for sweeping residential zoning policy changes without taking a step back and considering what these impacts are going to be. Let's move to the next slide. So to sum up, we believe, ASF believes, that the community should demand from the county board that certain specific studies be performed and produced to the community in parallel with any kind of a proposal like the Housing Arlington upzoning study, assuming that that study actually does go forward as Housing Arlington believes it's going to, and as every indication we have from the county board believes it ought to. First of all, we should demand a site-specific fiscal impact analysis for all new significant multi-unit residential projects because of the adverse costs of those projects that I mentioned earlier in this presentation. We should demand from the county board the immediate release of all the long-term operating budget forecasts that they are using internally for the county and APS, but which they have not revealed to the public. This doesn't require them to do anything new or do any kind of new study. We just like to see these existing forecasts, which we know exist, but which they have not produced, so that we can have a baseline to assess future studies that they might do on that basis. Third, we think that there are 3 specific comparative studies of county outcomes with and without upzoning that need to be prepared for the community before any kind of significant upzoning or other major changes in our land use plan are green-lighted. A long-term operating budget forecast going out 3 to 5 or maybe 7 years, based on the current numbers, including the impact of COVID, a long-term environmental impact forecast that takes into account climate change, and a long-term forecast of household income by quintiles to show income disparities among the highest and lowest earning families and individuals in Arlington compared to the national average, so we can assess claims that a missing middle type approach would be beneficial on a net basis to increase significantly increase the ability of lower income people to live in neighborhoods which their current income does not grant them the right to do, be based on using their own resources. In addition, on our website, we have provided a detailed study of the county's upzoning proposal prepared by John Huntley and Arlington Analytics, which demonstrates many of the things that I've been saying earlier in this presentation about the great unlikelihood that increases in so-called missing middle housing will enable affordable housing to people who really need the income to live in housing in Arlington. I urge you to go on our website and take a look at that study. We've also got another analysis of the missing middle study prepared by one of my colleagues at ASF, Ann Bodine, which is also worth your while to take a look at. And if you concur with many of the things we've said tonight, you should send your own email to the Arlington County Board at countyboard@arlingtonva.us explaining why you believe that these things need to be provided to you to enable you to make up your own minds about the missing middle study before actions are taken which can't be reversed later on. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the opportunity to answer questions.
Thank you, Peter. I have a couple questions in the chat box, and then I'll open it up to everyone to sort of ask their question. I also have a question which I'll hold off because maybe somebody else will ask the same question. And then I do have a closing thing to let everybody know about an opportunity if you are very keen on participating more in this version of the missing middle. So the first question that came in was from Phil, and the question was, what exactly will prevent the county from reverting to the present zoning if it is determined that any missing middle zoning change is not working as expected?
That is a legal issue under Virginia state law. And the thing that would likely enable a homeowner of such a property to prevent the county from reverting back is a body of law which essentially guarantees somebody who purchased a property based on existing zoning that there can't be a significant there can't be any kind of zoning change that significantly impacts the value of their property downward compared to when it was that they purchased it. So let's take the example of a property owner who buys a property 2 years after the county upzones the neighborhood. And that owner buys that property with the expectation that they are going to be able to build a duplex on the property now because of the upzoning. And they have an expectation that the land value combined with those two townhouses will produce a price, let's say, close to $3 million. Whereas if the property is subsequently downzoned because the county ex post facto concludes they wish they hadn't upzoned it and reverts back to a single family house, the owner might be able to demonstrate that that single family house might be worth only 65 or 70% of what the two duplexes would be worth. If they can prove that with expert testimony from a real estate appraiser, they would then argue that there's been a regulatory taking under Virginia law, and that the decision by the county to downzone entitles them to compensation. So they might not be able to force the zoning to be changed, but they could get that money. And so therefore the county would be creating a long-term, very large contingent liability by going back and downzoning if it did it in a significant way.
Okay. The other question is, you referred to these 2,900 units being added per year in one of your graphs of people moving in and building units. And are these 2,900 units being added per year? Are they primarily rental units, or are they primarily ownership condos or townhouses or single family homes?
I think it varied. That information, I believe, is available on the CPHD website. They have data in any given year. I talked about a period from 2000 to 2019, I think, on that graph. And basically the mix of whether that was ownership or rental would vary from year to year, but that was the number of residents. The numbers on there, the close to 3,000 per year, were residents of all types combined. But the greater granular detail that you're asking about in that question, I believe, is available on the CPHD website.
Perfect. I'm going to open it up to the floor. I know there's another question, but I want to give some other people, because it's from the same person that asked the question earlier. I want to give some other people a chance to kind of chime in here. So I think what Bill's going to do is Bill's going to unmute you, I think, or you, I think you can unmute yourself. Is that right, Bill?
Yeah, I don't think I have not muted people, so they should be able to unmute themselves.
Perfect. So if you have a question, go ahead and chime in.
But unmute yourself first.
Yes, please.
Hi, this is Sada. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Please, Sada, go ahead.
Yeah, I am sorry I missed the beginning of the presentation in case that information was in it, but has the county defined the price range of the housing that will be the middle kind of level housing that we are currently missing?
I don't believe that they have defined that yet. I believe that what they envision is that during the study that will be launched according to their pronouncements over the summer, that they're going to launch a study in early October that will lead them ultimately to make a recommendation regarding which neighborhoods they would propose to upzone and what the likely prices would be of the housing that would be, of the incremental new housing that would be enabled by the upzoning proposal. So I don't believe at the moment that they have defined price ranges in particular neighborhoods or any neighborhood that they would envision would be created. But they have conceded, however, that this would be driven basically by the marketplace, that they wouldn't be able to control or put a cap on the price of the housing that would be green lighted as a result of upzoning.
Yeah, this is Chris. I have a question for Peter.
Go ahead, Chris.
So you, towards the end, you mentioned that there are, you're looking for addition of some long-term studies to the current study project, and that now is not the time to make any changes. So what is the time frame that you're looking for these long-term studies should encompass, and what would you expect, not having those studies yet, but what do you expect that any zoning change, when would they really kick in? Because I mean, obviously, especially in the current climate, there would not be immediate, sprouting up of duplexes and whatever have you. So, I mean, all of that would take years, right? So what time frame are you really talking about, or would expect the county would be talking about?
Well, here's what I would expect. I would expect the county to kick this study off in October, and sometime in 2021, the county would return with a more specific proposal about what neighborhoods they would envision upzoning, how much incremental housing would be created, what the price range would be, and over what time period those units would be brought online if the upzoning was approved. And first of all, our group, ASF, what we're saying is Housing Arlington should really be directed by the county board, that part of the study should envision a no action alternative, namely that the conclusion of the study would be allowed to be no upzoning at all because of various factors that are developed during the study. We at ASF don't have a particular degree of optimism that that kind of a direction is going to be issued by the county board to Housing Arlington, but we think it should. If it's not, what we're saying to the county is, if you're going to let Housing Arlington go forward and do this kind of a study to produce the kind of results I just described, you must also do these other economic and fiscal impact studies on the same timetable. So to do and present the results of the study, so that whenever it is that Housing Arlington completes and comes forward with its proposal regarding what areas should be upzoned and the price ranges and the amount of time it might take, we would have to lay alongside of those the economic and fiscal impact and environmental impact studies as well, so that when we get to the point of the community considering whether upzoning should occur, it can consider it with those other studies side by side so that the costs of the upzoning proposal can be weighed against whatever benefits are claimed for it.
I got a question chat, a follow-up question, and then I guess I'll follow that up with a question. So the question that came in is, are there any current studies for comparable communities? And the only comparable communities I would think of are ones around the DC area, but maybe there's other places. Comparable communities that show that the missing middle approach would result in availability of lower or moderate housing in Arlington.
We have a long analysis on our website of other communities, both in the region and outside the region, that have sought to try to do something like this. And there are also academic analyses of these. I mentioned one that we commissioned ourselves by Arlington Analytics for Arlington that also refers to what other communities have done. So I urge you and others on the call to take a look at that one. In addition, we've got references on our website to Michael Storper, who's a professor, I believe, at the University of Chicago, who has done studies of other communities that have sought to upzone. They include, and these are in various stages in other parts of the country, Minneapolis, Portland, the state of California, and Oregon. In various respects, they have moved forward with this type of missing middle approach, but none of them have done it for long enough to know, in fact, what the impacts have actually been compared to what they expected. So actually, one of our points is, why not let them try it for 3 or 4 years and not debate in the abstract what we think the outcome might be. Let's give them 3 or 4 years and we'll look at it. But examples like Minneapolis really aren't comparable to Arlington because the cost of housing is so much lower in that market. It's not a hot market like ours. Professor Storper and Professor Dr. Huntley for Arlington Analytics have analyzed this, and basically their conclusion is more housing will be created, but it really isn't going to be affordable. That's their conclusion, and they do cite and explain the economic underpinnings of that conclusion.
Great. Peter, I have a question that I asked before we started this call. And you said it was okay to publicly ask this. So our October 1 presentation is by, and I may get this wrong, Affordable Housing Solutions. Did I get that acronym right?
That's correct.
Okay. And they are sort of working hand in glove with the county on these presentations, the engagement sessions. In one engagement session, from what I was told by a participant, was all AHS basically running the engagement session. So that was a little strange, but in your experience, you've been around a long time. You've served on all these civic associations and other things that you said that you've done. The one thing that I'm a little interested in knowing, in your experience, with something like this that has such a broad impact, is it usual to have a county board member on the board of directors of the nonprofit AHS that is pushing the missing middle thing to fruition? I mean, to me, I would think that that's a bit of a conflict of interest, and was interested in what your take on that is.
Sure. Well, what has been reasonably common in Arlington over a period of time is that we have had county board members who have served on the boards of nonprofits at the same time, but typically those instances have been serving on the board of, let's say, a ballet company or an art studio or a domestic violence shelter or something of that nature. And the opportunities throughout any particular year where a matter might come before the county board that would have a direct financial impact on that nonprofit entity are small and they don't happen very often. And the county board member that might be serving on one of those could recuse themselves from a vote in a case like that. Here, when you have someone simultaneously serving on the county board and on the board of an organization like AHS, there is a lot more potential for at least what the ordinary layperson would consider to be a difficult, unseemly, or inappropriate looking situation, because a group like AHS, interested across the board in affordable housing and other kinds of issues in Arlington, always has policy issues before the county board. Or certainly there are issues before the county board that always implicate the policies of a group like AHS. Almost every regular meeting of the county board has issues like that. So my personal opinion is, and I'm not speaking for our own organization, ASF, right now, my personal opinion is that this is not a wise thing to do, and a county board member who is serving on the board of both would be wise to resign from the board of AHS while they serve on the county board, just to avoid the appearance of impropriety because of the frequency with which decisions come before the board that AHS is advocating a particular point of view about.
Perfect, thank you. We got a question that came in and sort of relevant to that. Why is Housing Arlington, and I'm not sure, is that a nonprofit? Why is Housing Arlington conducting the study versus county staff?
Okay, well, actually, Housing Arlington is part of the county staff. The people who work at Housing Arlington are all employees of the Arlington County government. They are paid salaries by them. So Housing Arlington is actually an umbrella name that the Arlington County government created to be the leader of this study that is now called the Missing Middle Study. And to populate Housing Arlington, they brought in people from CPHD and other parts of the county government. So basically, Housing Arlington and county staff are one and the same.
Any questions from the floor?
Chris?
How are you, John?
Hey, good to see you, sir. So
Thank you.
just back to the question about the potential conflict of interest that that somebody raised in terms of Takis' service on our board of Arlington, the Arlington Alliance for Housing Solutions. That question came up last night in the Committee of 100 candidates debate, and Audrey Clement thought it was a clear conflict of interest. Libby said that they had gotten the advice of the county attorney, Stephen McIsaac, and McIsaac said that it was not a conflict of interest. Now, I think it's enough of a question that it would certainly be appropriate for somebody to come to the next, dial in virtually to the next board meeting during public comment and ask the question, or send an email to the county board and say, you're troubled by this. you'd like to see the opinion of the county attorney, or you'd like to have confirmation that the county attorney in fact ruled that this was not a conflict of interest. I don't think it should be swept under the rug. You know, somebody could also write a letter to the editor. I think it's an issue, and Peter's right. Typically, you know, Eric Gutschall was on the board, for example, of Doorways for Women and Families. I made a decision when I was on the board not to be on any other boards, and now I'm on a couple of boards. But it's just too much of an improper thing, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there questions? Don't be shy.
I've actually got a question for you, Chris, and for the rest of the Civic Association. Are you, I mean, what's your sense of the overall mood and perception of the neighborhood on this issue? Is it kind of, I see Phil Klingelhofer's there, and Michael Raisin, and John Bloom, a lot of great people. I'm just curious how wide the sentiments in your neighborhood range.
Yeah, so I certainly can't speak for everybody or majority, but we did bring this up back before COVID hit to the board, and the board had decided that we didn't have enough information to sort of bring it to the full Civic Association, and that the thinking from the board was at the time, let's wait to see what these studies say before we sort of bring it forth to get a general sense. I certainly personally have had mixed discussions with people. Some people are more of the reasoning of, we need more housing, we need to be able to increase diversity, which is laudable and absolutely fine. Or we need to be able to make housing more affordable, which of course is laudable and fine too. And I think we all would like that. But I do also get the same thing that, you know, we only have so much space. You know, there is an impact on the environment. And, you know, let's just use common sense. And I'll just use my lot. I have 2 legacy trees on my lot. If I was to sell my home and a developer come in and put 2 townhouses, both of those legacy trees would go. I mean, they would have to go, because there would just be no way to do that without getting rid of those. So there's some of that. Of course, the schools, the overcrowding of schools has been an issue. I mean, we got an email, one community member who is actually coaching my daughter's softball team right now, sent a long email stating how our schools are already overcrowded, and, you know, just piling more housing on top of housing is just going to increase that, because there's really no place to put any more schools. The county missed an opportunity with I forgot the name of the property, but it's, you know what I mean, the one up near
property, Wilson Boulevard. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
In Dominion Hills. Yeah.
They missed that opportunity. You can't put a school in Bluemont Park because it's a watershed. You can't put it in a lot of these other parks because of other issues. There's just not enough space. The only thing that maybe Peter had sort of alluded to in a map, there's maybe the community center up there in North Arlington that's next to Ethan Allen Park that maybe could be reconverted back to a school, but you don't have the space anymore. So I guess it's mixed, but I haven't really sent out anything to get a general sense from people.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Any other questions? Because I have one thing to sort of throw in if nobody else has a question.
Yeah, this is Chris again. For Peter, you know, you mentioned a lot of different studies and you know, various concerns and a little bit of a kitchen sink. So if I mean, it may be a bit unfair to you, but could you boil it down to say, well, if what the county says, the purpose of missing middle is to increase diversity and increase affordability, that per se would be okay, regardless of the number of people that would bring into the county. But if that same number were brought in non-affordable and non-diverse housing, you would not be okay with that? I mean, are those the main factors that we should be concerned about or making a decision based upon? Or, you know, would you say you know, other things are overriding that?
Well, what I would say is that you need to have the additional studies performed that I mentioned on my last slide, the studies with and without the additional housing that the missing middle study will come up with and propose. You need a long-term fiscal impact study. You need a long-term environmental impact study. And you need other tools, long-term operating tools, and a public facilities master plan to weigh the costs and benefits of doing it. The idea that it would be nice in Arlington to have a more diverse population is one we support and agree with. The idea that it would be nice in Arlington to have a lot more housing that would be a lot more affordable for a lot more people, we could agree with in the abstract, but we don't agree that in a hot market like Arlington, that these outcomes are anywhere likely as a result of upzoning. We think in any event that rather than arguing whether we're right or somebody else is right, these studies should be made available to you and everyone else so you can decide for yourselves whether the benefits are worth the cost.
Any other questions?
Just a comment here, Chris. It's Michael Raisin, and I agree with Peter's thoughts on this. I think the Housing Arlington study should incorporate what he is asking for. And if we can have that last slide disseminated to the community association or leaders, we can make our own comments to the county board.
I'll certainly get with, I will get with Bill and Peter afterwards, right, to see if we can get these bullet points in an email, and I'll push them out to people that they can ask these questions, because they are fair questions to ask. Any other questions and comments?
I have
Yes,
a
sir,
comment, maybe a question. There's a lot of reference to the environmental impact of zoning changes and especially more density. And I just wanted to note that from a sustainability and climate point of view, there's I'll say a lot of scholarship and thinking that greater density close to employment centers, close to transit lines, is considered a good thing, and that big single family style land use is considered the worst possible use of land from a long-term kind of climate and greenhouse gas point of view. And that's just because greenhouse gas use per capita goes down really remarkably and substantially as density goes up. That's not, that's just a comment from about an environmental kind of scholarship issue that I think also, needs to be factored in here and considered in terms of our long-term planning. It doesn't mean that I'm for or against. I'm kind of waiting to see what the missing middle study involves, and I am kind of assuming that it will kind of follow smart growth principles and talk about zoning changes along transit lines and in places where it makes sense. And I guess that's just a comment. I'm wondering if Peter or others have a response.
Sure. I have a response. The original plan in Arlington, developed in the 1970s, was to concentrate our density primarily along the two metro corridors, which ultimately became the Orange Line, and the Route 1 corridor, where Metro now also runs. And at the time that that proposal was made, there was an agreement in the community that by concentrating density there was in effect an implied promise, not legally enforceable in any way, that other areas in Arlington that are now primarily zoned single family would remain that way. And we would try to take advantage of the principles that John just enunciated by concentrating our density along the metro corridors. We also have a situation in which we have neighbors in Fairfax, in Loudoun, in Alexandria, in other parts of Virginia. We're a region in which we have to consider the impact of increasing density in Arlington as well as increasing it elsewhere. So I guess my bottom line to the point that that John was justifiably making is that we should certainly include in the studies we perform a consideration of the benefits of increased density, the environmental benefits that increased density offers, but we should also include in our studies the adverse negative impacts of zoning changes on other aspects of our environment, such as the ones that Chris was mentioning that would have to take place if two legacy trees on his property were perforce removed to enable a duplex to be built on it. We should weigh all these factors, but not just talk about the potential benefits, but also the costs. And what our group, Arlingtonians for our Sustainable Future, sees coming out of Housing Arlington is a lot of, for want of a better term, rah-rah about the alleged potential benefits, but not providing the community with the related costs that go with them so that you can make an informed choice.
Thanks, John, for that question. I want to keep the questions going, but also want to say for anybody that wants to get off, I just want to sort of throw this out. There is a cross civic association task force being formed. There is about 5 or 6 civic associations. We've had sort of a couple conference calls between the civic association presidents, all adjacent Bluemont, Dominion Hills, myself, the one that is, and again, I sort of miss it, Lee Boulevard Heights, I think on the other side of 50, also over there where Outback is. I can't remember what that civic association is called, but there's 5 or 6 of them that have sort of all kind of come together because they're very concerned about this, and they are forming together a task force to sort of dive deeper into this. The civic association presidents are sort of split on whether we should be on that task force or not. I certainly don't think that being a president of a civic association trying to be balanced would be fair for me to be on that. So I sort of am siding with some other people in that regard. So if there are people that are very interested in that, please email me, let me know, and I will hook you up with the task force that's being sort of set up. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yes, sir, Greg.
Just to kind of follow up on John's comment, I think the environmental impact is substantial, and I guess my question comes from more of a sociological impact. And I guess it's twofold. I mean, one, has a study been done to figure out what a livable wage currently is for Arlington? Like what someone needs to make per year to be able to afford a house and live in Arlington? And then if that is defined, is there a possibility that this, if there's some kind of, this is where I'm not an expert, but is there some kind of ability to put in to a medium housing clause that would say, if you decide to rezone, you cannot sell the house for more than X per square foot of housing, you know, so that you figure out what the living wage is. And if we're trying to make affordable housing for police officers, food service workers, etc., can you just define on the current wages what they need to be able to live in, you know, and how much of that mortgage payment they could stomach, and then put a cap on it and just say you can't develop something unless it's that much money. And I'm guessing in Arlington a lot of people won't develop if it won't. But if they do decide, if this is not profiteering and economically driven and really based on creating affordable housing, does the county get behind that?
So let me respond to that excellent question. As you framed it, Greg, it's probably likely that under Virginia law, the Arlington County government would not be allowed to put a cap of the kind that you described on the house, because it would violate the principle that the owner is entitled to realize the primary market value. So if Arlington wanted to help the people whose wages you were mentioning, who couldn't in any way be likely to afford the market price of the house that would likely be constructed, another way that Arlington could do it would be to significantly increase rent subsidy or ownership subsidy payments to individuals who couldn't afford the market price, to enable them to live in the housing that would otherwise be unaffordable to them, to bridge the gap between the wages they're likely to earn and what they could afford to negotiate with a commercial lender if it was a purchase, or with a landlord if it was a rental. And the benefit of doing that would be obviously that you could then enable people to go out in the marketplace and live in a house that they couldn't otherwise live. So in addition to studying the impacts on the environment and on our budget that I've been talking about, it would be perfectly appropriate to want to know from the Arlington County government what the cost of providing rent subsidies and ownership subsidies to those categories of people might be, the added cost, and then look as a community and say, okay, it's maybe probably illegal to put a cap on the price, but we could achieve the same objective through a subsidy. And we as a community, having looked at what the impact on taxes and other impacts of actually enabling this increased housing type process, we've looked at it and we've decided that we do want to incur that cost to enable the types of people you described to live there. So we're going to incur it. And that's a perfectly reasonable type of study to undertake. And it should be undertaken by the people who believe that that's an appropriate thing to do, should advocate that that type of consideration be incorporated into the Housing Arlington process, or should be done by somebody else before we have to reach the question of enabling the incremental upzoning that otherwise might be coming at us, to take that approach into account, even if we can't put the kind of cap on it that you were mentioning.
So Peter, just sort of a follow-up on that. So what you're sort of saying is something like what DC did in the 90s, of providing first-time homebuyer tax credits for 2 or 3 years or however many years it was. That is maybe more appropriate, or some sort of a subsidy to have people be able to afford housing without maybe the tax burden or things like that. Is that sort of what you're...
Well, without commenting directly on whether it ends up being a tax credit or an outright subsidy, what I'm talking about is putting in directly into the hands of the people you're trying to help money to enable them to bridge the cost between the marketplace value of the new housing and what they could afford. And if we're trying to help categories of people, that is a better way to do it, that will actually provide those people the ability to live in the house. So therefore, by definition, they can afford it because the government is bridging the gap. But what we have been doing in the past, for the past 20 or 30 years in Arlington, is we've had a different approach by and large, although we do have some housing grants and we do have some rental subsidies. But by and large, we've been trying to achieve this affordable housing goal through adding more and more units. And in the most recent Affordable Housing Master Plan in 2015, they set a goal of adding roughly 600 of this type of unit per year, and they've never done better than about a third of that. And the reason for that is similar to what I was talking about before. Arlington is a hot market. That's why enabling this so-called increased diversity of housing types, even though we have a lot of those types now, to make it even more diverse in more areas, is not going to produce the kind of affordable housing that Greg was asking about. It's going to produce high-end, expensive duplexes and triplexes and quadruplexes in many areas, as well as adding on the cost side to the pressures on our infrastructure, where Arlington County doesn't have a plan for how it's going to finance the infrastructure for the population that's coming here without any upzoning.
Thank you. Any other questions? It is now 8:15. Want to make sure everybody gets a chance to be heard or ask their question.
I have another question. Are any of our neighboring jurisdictions doing anything like this? Again, in terms of sort of the regional context and impact, since Arlington, in terms of its footprint, is a very small county. I'm just kind of curious what the neighboring jurisdictions are doing.
I don't believe that there is a neighboring jurisdiction that has actually adopted an upzoning plan like the one that Housing Arlington says it's going to launch a study of in October. The places in the United States that have done that are some of the ones I mentioned earlier: Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland, the state of California. Those are among the places that have actually approved it. But our neighboring jurisdictions at the moment have not. In the legislative session in the Virginia legislature, in the last session that concluded in the spring of 2020, not counting the special session that they're in now, there was an effort by a member of the House of Delegates to adopt a kind of an upzoning approval plan for the entire state. And that proposal was shelved by the legislature and not approved. So I think that the bottom line answer to your question is no.
Other questions, comments? Going once. Going twice. And Mike Raisin has struck out. Anyways, so again, like I said, if you're interested in serving on a sort of a task force to promote these issues that Peter has talked about, please email me and I will point you in the right direction, in the right thing, all right areas. Also, to remind everybody, October 1st, we will have the sort of proponent of the missing middle study, Affordable Housing Solutions, to come on, to come in and sort of do their presentation. And some of the questions that I asked to them too privately, and I don't want to necessarily share their answer publicly, but let's just say it was not to my liking. That's why I raised the same question here. So with that, I also really want to thank Peter and Bill for really taking time out of their schedules for doing this. Very, very appreciated. And Bill, thank you so much for really the Herculean effort of recording this so we could post it on the Boulevard Manor website, because there's a lot of people that can't be here tonight, have other things they got going on, and they really do want to review it. With that said, Peter, I'll give you any closing thoughts, and after that, we'll say goodbye to everybody.
Well, Chris, thank you very much, and thank you to your civic association, the Boulevard Manor Civic Association, for giving us this opportunity to share with you what our perspective, the perspective of Arlingtonians for our sustainable future, is on this Housing Arlington proposal. We think that the proposal that is coming forth, the study that's going to be launched in October, does need to incorporate these other impacts of development that we've summarized here on this last slide of our presentation. We will certainly work with you to make this presentation available to your civic association, this slide, any other slide, and the recording. And I also want to thank my colleague Bill Roos for all of the effort that he put in to organize this. And to all of you who've stuck with this and looked at this, this is a very important proposal for our community, especially as we're facing these other impacts of COVID and the other environmental and fiscal problems that we have here in the county. We very much appreciate this opportunity, and thank you again.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Again, if you have any questions you want to maybe send to me in writing, we'll get them to Peter and can have an answer. But other than that, thank you very much and have a great night. Stay healthy.
Thank you.